Welcome to Supercool, the show about low-carbon innovation now scaling. Each week, we talk with the founders, CEOs, and executives whose companies are winning customers, growing revenue, and capturing market share by turning carbon-cutting ideas into competitive advantage. This is the rise of the low-carbon economy, a multi-trillion-dollar transformation already underway. I'm your host, Josh Dorfman. A quick note about a new course from Supercool before we jump into today's show. Supercool listeners have heard me mention some of the sustainable ventures I've founded or launched over the past decades, from my first modern sustainable furniture company called Vivavi in 2004 to my most recent venture, Planted, a maker of carbon-negative building materials, which Fast Company named one of the world's most innovative companies in 2024. Through it all, I've come to realize that building really awesome climate innovation is half the battle. The other half is getting the market to adopt it, and often that part's even harder. After interviewing over 50 of the world's greatest climate companies through this podcast, I started to see the same tactics and patterns emerge for how today's leaders effectively drive sales, scale revenue, and win new business. We built the Supercool Climate Adoption Playbook to distill their approaches into 5 easy-to-understand adoption levers, so every operator working on climate solutions today can use them too. The course is 8 modules, comprised of 20 fast-paced, real-world case studies that show you exactly what today's climate winners are doing. In about 2 hours, you'll get up to speed on strategies you can immediately apply in your business or organization. If you're building in the climate space, check out the course. You can find it at getsuper.cool/playbook. And now for today's show. 2025 has been a fascinating year to cover the clean energy transition and the innovators and entrepreneurs building and scaling real-world climate solutions. Amid political headwinds from the new administration in Washington, where electric vehicle tax credits sunset and federal support for solar and wind disintegrated, the shift to a low-carbon future marches onward. We find ourselves in a new moment. Prices for clean energy technologies are plummeting, and deployments are scaling. New business models are making climate solutions more affordable and more profitable. And every business and technology story, including AI, is also a climate story. Making sense of this moment, of all the forces shaping it, is exciting, confusing, terrifying, and hope-inducing all at once. Here to talk about it with me is David Roberts, renowned climate and clean energy journalist. Dave has covered the clean energy transition and all its political and economic manifestations for over 2 decades. He's probably written more words about the battles, triumphs, setbacks, and, I mean this in the best way possible, the minutiae underpinning a world constantly wrestling with itself to build a more prosperous, just, and clean future. I invited Dave to join me because he's such a clear thinker, and he articulates incredibly complex topics in ways that I find novel, understandable, and frankly, delightful. I wanted to hear how he sees the year that just transpired, how he interprets its implications, the early signals he's keying into that may become major storylines, and what he thinks is coming in the year ahead. Here's my conversation with Dave. Dave, welcome back to Supercool.
Glad to be here.
Last we spoke was a moment earlier this year, which was in our world, I mean, you could assign a lot of adjectives to it, but I spoke to you, or you came on the pod rather, the day the one big beautiful bill passed.
Oh.
Which is why I think we had such a wonderfully animated conversation. So I caught you in a moment, which was great.
Yes. The anger was fresh. It's had time to smolder now, so.
Exactly. So having you back on, super excited to jump in, kind of look back the year we just went through. Obviously, so much transpired, as now is always the case when we're looking at clean energy, and use that then as a jumping point to think through, okay, well, what may lie ahead in 2026? So with that, when you look back on 2025 and climate and energy and your beat, what's the one sentence headline in your head?
Data centers prompt long overdue discussions and changes in the energy system.
Interesting. Okay.
Not bad for top of the dome.
That is awesome, man. And are you talking about data centers now? Is it essentially almost becomes interchangeable with AI.
Mostly
factors.
AI data centers. Like the AI data centers are the really big ones, the really big power hungry ones. Yeah.
Okay, so let's unpack that. What conversations have ensued that you've been tracking?
The way to understand this is for like the past 20 years in the U.S., electricity demand has been roughly stable, has not gone up and down. So for 20 years, it's been sort of a cozy situation. And that also shaped kind of the clean energy fight, because any clean energy you wanted to put on the grid, you had to take something else off. So there's a lot of fights over retirements and stuff like that. Along come data centers. So like we know in the long term, midterm to long term, there's going to be a lot more demand for electricity. We know this because over the long term, we're electrifying our transportation, we're electrifying our home heating and cooling, we're electrifying industry eventually. Like it's all getting electrified eventually. So there's going to be demand coming. What happened this year and last basically is like all of a sudden, relatively suddenly, this AI boom happened. And the AI people have decided that raw compute, quantity is sort of the metric of success here. So they want to build all the data centers that can be built. And so all of a sudden, after 20 years of stable electricity demand, you're seeing the line go up and to the right. And the projections are nuts. Like the projections are crazy. The sheer quantity of energy that they're projecting these things are going to demand in the next 5 to 10 years is crazy. But then the second crazy aspect is the variance in these projections. Like how much energy are data centers going to take? How many data centers are going to get built? How much are they going to consume? Wow, do we have no idea. Like the distance between the upper bound and the lower bound of those projections, the entire energy demand of the UK can fit in that space between the highest and the lowest projections. So two things. One, demand is on the rise sharply in the short term, probably also durably in the long term, but also we're just in an absolute mire of uncertainty. We just don't know how much energy demand, how fast. We really have no idea. And so this is like, if you can imagine the electricity sector kind of being sleepy and cozy for 20 years, all of a sudden climate change is banging on the door. The clean energy people are banging on the door. The distributed energy people are banging on the door. The data center people are banging on the door. All of a sudden everybody wants a revolutionary new electricity system that does all these things and is so much more load bearing than it was before. Like from the perspective of the electric utilities, which have traditionally been a pretty sleepy kind of backwater, these are businesses where you get guaranteed returns. So there's not a lot of risk taking. These are not business cowboys. This is where like boring people go to be boring. All of a sudden, from their perspective, they're being asked to be the vanguard of a revolution, basically. So that's the story of the year is all of a sudden the notion that relatively quickly we need lots more electricity grid capacity has sunk in now. Everybody's freaking out about it. And that's kind of the story of the year.
Yeah, I love that. We've seen that kind of unfold from a number of different angles, and we've covered the story certainly of electrification, what's happening in the home. And when I think about this year and I think about conversations that we've had with companies like Quilt that's doing some really cool heat pumps and ductless heating cooling systems for homes, and the first over-the-air software upgrade for an HVAC system, which just kind of points to where we're going, or like a copper that puts a battery in an induction range stove, so you don't, right? All that stuff. And when I look at that, it's like, oh, cool. I actually think we're moving into this, what I think is a new moment, because all the good stuff, all the upgrades, all the things that you want actually in your home, whether you're thinking about electrification or not, is actually electrification, those choices that are now gaining traction. So we've looked at the electrification from what does it mean sort of from this poll consumer demand end, which is still pretty weak, I mean, compared to what you're describing from like an AI data center.
This gets to, I think, one of the most interesting things where that story and my story come together, which is why I think it's so interesting. So one of the ongoing kind of meta stories right now in the energy system is electrification. It's just happening. It's accelerating everywhere. But a lot of that is distributed stuff. It's like stoves and water heaters in the household, and rooftop solar and EVs, are a huge piece of that puzzle. All that stuff is distributed widely, and for years people have been pounding the table. We need to invest in that distributed stuff, build that up, build the grid up from the bottom up. Start at the grid edge with the consumer devices, make those strong, make local distribution networks strong, build the grid from the bottom up. That's what we need to do for long-term successful electrification. But as you say, the money has been missing. Who is going to invest in that stuff? It's so fragmented. There's not really a clear market for it. There's 50 different business models. It's a very fragmented market and under-invested, basically. And so the question has been where's the missing money? Who's going to invest in building up this ground-up energy system? Well, along come hyperscalers with their giant data centers. They desperately need to get these data centers online. When they build these data centers and they can't get interconnected to the grid because there's not enough grid capacity to let them on, they are losing millions of dollars a day as they're sitting there not computing. So here are entities with buckets of money, all the money in the frickin' world, who badly need grid capacity. And nuclear power plants, they're all horny for nuclear, but nuclear power plants take 5 to 10 years, best case scenario, which is an eternity if you're losing millions of dollars a day. The supply chain for natural gas plants is backed up. It's taking 3 to 5 years to get a gas plant, which again is an eternity. Even solar and storage at a utility scale take a while to build. The fastest grid capacity that you can get is the grid capacity that already exists. It's just spread around in little bits and pieces in households and buildings and neighborhoods. This sort of scattered grid capacity that is underinvested in. So look, people with buckets of money need grid capacity. Distributed grid capacity needs investment. This was sort of the thrust of my audio essay the other day, is we need to find some way to allow the hyperscalers to pay for the distributed capacity. They are the missing money. They've got all the money in the world. I talked to a guy on my pod who's trying to set up a kind of a marketplace where this can happen, who said if you could siphon off 3% of the money that is going into AI data centers right now and spend it on this distributed capacity, you could, with that money, stand up 100 gigawatts worth of virtual power plants, coordinated distributed capacity. That would be about $4 billion in new revenue for this underinvested market. And so then the data center comes along, the grid operator says, sorry, we don't have any grid capacity. The data center says, fine, I'll shovel money into developing this distributed grid capacity. You give me credit for it, let me onto your grid. Bada boom, bada bing, everybody wins. The data centers get online like they want to. The utilities can be seen disciplining the data centers, getting something out of them. And ordinary people get investment in heat pumps and solar and storage systems and batteries and EVs and home energy management and all this kind of distributed stuff. To me, that is a win-win-win that is just waiting to happen. That will be the big story, I think, of 2026 or 2027. Once people can figure out the business model, figure out the arrangements to just get the money out of the data center people into the distributed capacity. That is the most exciting nascent story, I think, in energy right now.
Wow, I love that. So from where I sit, as we look at the story, as an example, we spoke to a company, in fact, it's the episode this week on our podcast, company called Parity. They do essentially HVAC remote optimization for large multifamily high-rises, right? 60-story high-rises. Avalon Bay is a big customer. They just put out a case study last month. They're in multiple Avalon Bay, high-rises in New York City, where they go in. The payback comes in year one because they're cutting your HVAC costs, they're cutting your carbon, they're actually taking over where there's just small teams for those kinds of buildings to run these really big buildings. And now they're in demand response or virtual power plant, whatever you want to call it. So the case study says, yes, this building saved $190,000. We cut our costs, we cut our HVAC costs because we're optimized. Awesome, right? And we, Avalon Bay, earned $30,000 on that building because we actually now are enrolled through parity because they have this huge load they can provide back to the grid. So when I look at that, and then I start to see companies like Butterfly, who are basically doing like the thing in McDonald's, right, and Popeyes, and this other sector of buildings, and then you have all the companies doing this.
All
homes,
this
right?
work at the grid edge, because the overriding fact here that people need to keep in mind, because the data centers are showing up, and what you're seeing is like utility executives saying, "Oh my God, we got to build all these new power plants." But the fact is, the grid as it exists is under 50% utilization right now, historically low utilization, because we build the grid for the peaks, the most energy that might be demanded at any one point. So you build all that stuff for the peak. Most of the time it's not at the peak, which means most of the time most of that infrastructure you built and paid for isn't doing anything. So obviously the cheapest and first thing we should do is utilize the grid we have more fully, and that's what all these grid edge things are about. Optimizing HVAC systems, coordinating EV charging, putting batteries on households and businesses and distribution nodes. All that stuff is about make better use of the grid we already have. That's huge and ongoing. But the thing is, like, here's a little anecdote. I was looking at a chart about why is U.S. rooftop solar so much more expensive than Australian rooftop solar, right? Like, I think people have heard this by now, sort of legendary. It's like 3 to 5 times as much. If you look at the chart of the costs, most of the delta, most of the reason the U.S. stuff costs more is customer acquisition. We are trying currently to build energy infrastructure, and that's how we should think about your EV and your water heater and your rooftop solar system. They are energy infrastructure. We are currently trying to build energy infrastructure by knocking on one door at a time and persuading one homeowner at a time to make these investments. Painfully, horrifically slow, painful, expensive way to do it. So one of the things we could do, if you brought a hyperscaler with a bunch of money who needs a bunch of grid capacity, and you have a utility who can coordinate it, you can do those things in bulk. What's called a distributed capacity purchase, DCP, something. There's acronyms for everything. But the idea is, like, get the utility involved and have it designate like a neighborhood or 2,000 houses or whatever. That skips the customer acquisition part of the story entirely, and then you cut costs dramatically on a per job basis. We need some way of aggregating these jobs so that, like, solar installers are not spending all this time and money and effort trying to persuade people to do this one at a time.
Where is this conversation happening today? I mean, you said there's some nascent conversation. Who's talking about it?
Lots of energy sort of experts. It's like the elephant and the blind people. There's a lot of people groping at different parts of this larger problem. So there's tons of people now working on data center flexibility, right? So if you're a data center and you absolutely demand, I need always on, like I need like a megawatt of always on 6 nines reliability power, that's just a tall order, and it's going to be really hard for a grid to accommodate you. The grid is going to have to do a lot of prep work, and that's probably going to take many years. But if you can dial back your demand just a little bit, just a few hours of the year when we get these big peaks, that makes things exponentially easier for the grid. So there's a lot of people right now working, for instance, on data center flexibility. How can we make these data centers more flexible energy consumers? Some of that is through the flexibility of the compute itself. Some of it is just having some on-site distributed energy, having some on-site, often diesel generators, but some on-site power of your own, so you can rely on that instead of the grid. So the people working on that, there's like Rewiring America, the group Rewiring America. Yep. They're the kind of the ones who tipped me off to this whole thing in the first place. They're talking with utilities about trying to do this, like aggregate jobs, aggregate the capacity, and basically sell it to data centers. And I think often we clean energy or climate people are in a position of pushing solutions that people don't have to choose. You know what I mean? That they can just go, we're just trying to talk them into doing it out of like good-heartedness or social concern or whatever. But in this case, the logic of the situation is sort of inexorable. They need power fast, and they just can't get it. And distributed capacity is the only place to get it quickly. So I think just the logic of the situation is sort of inexorably carrying everyone involved in this discussion in that direction, albeit slowly and begrudgingly, because I think a lot of utility execs would rather build a bunch of new stuff than make better use of the stuff they already have, because they make money off building new stuff. They don't make any money off better maintaining or operating the stuff they already have. So they want to build big new stuff. And then you've got these dumbass AI cowboys who are all thrilled about being masculine and have decided we need more masculine energy in the world. And I think they think that like nukes, like a big nuclear power plant, is the sort of masculine way to do this. You need big power. So they're like dreaming about nuclear power. They're spending a bunch of money on it, to which I say, Godspeed. I've been at this a while. I've seen several cycles of this. I've seen several cycles of nuclear hope crash on the shores. So maybe this one will turn out differently. But even best case scenario, you're not going to get any of these little SMRs, these little miniature nuclear plants that they think they're going to build. Even if everything works out, that's like 10 years out. What I think of as the best and cleanest solution is just distributed capacity. The analogy I use, I'm trying to get this to catch on. I don't think it will, but like people, about heat pumps. You've done episodes on heat pumps, and the reason heat pumps are so efficient, they are like magic, right? A natural gas furnace, you put the fuel in, you're going to get some smaller proportion of heat out. Best case, 0.97% of the energy out. You're like 0.97 efficient. Heat pumps produce more heat than the energy you put in, right? This is the coefficient of performance. I'm sure you've talked about it on your show. They have a COP of like 3, which means like for every unit of energy you put in, you get 3 units of energy out. And you're like, how do they do that? It's like magic. And the answer is they don't generate heat. They just go find it. The heat already exists out in the ground. They just go round it up. And it's a lot easier to round things up than it is to generate things. Similarly with grid capacity. It's easier and faster just to go round up the grid capacity that already exists than it is to generate any new power, almost by definition. Like that is the fastest and cheapest way to do things. I don't want to underplay the barriers. There's no technological barrier, but like the business models and figuring out how to structure these deals, that's a very complicated sort of like soft costs. But if we can figure that out, there's a lot of money waiting to flood in, a lot of work waiting to be done. So that's the main thing I've been tracking these days.
I was in Las Vegas in November for Schneider Electric's Innovation Summit, which was really cool. And one of the things that struck me, I was listening in on a panel, and they were talking about their software for the grid. Like they're building this one digital grid platform, right? And it was like really trying to say, hey, we want to build this orchestration layer. I know others want to do it as well, and
lots,
are, right?
My inbox is chock full of people trying to do that.
And we have startups that are thinking about pieces of that with like Camus, these incredible teams, brilliant people. But where I'm going with this is, I hear you talking about data centers. I'm so glad you led the conversation with that. For me, I come back from about a year of doing all this work, digging all these people, and I come home and I talk to my wife. I'm like, I am just so excited about the grid. And like I started my career
welcome to my world.
I know, man, but I started my career in consumer sustainability. And then I've built some businesses around climate tech, and I love B2B and materials and all the stuff that I'm talking about, like electrification and these gadgets and appliances. But man, the grid, obviously it's just like the biggest system in the world. There's something about
it. It's not just like, it's conceptually interesting, right? It's like intellectually interesting. It's like an interconnected network, and you get all these network effects, which are like very interesting to think about and very unpredictable, and it's endlessly fascinating. I totally agree. And I love that you talked to Astrid, because one of the fascinating things to me is she lived and was in large part responsible for the kind of revolution at Google where they shifted from big centralized servers to distributed computing. And what they realized is, even though our instincts push us toward wanting big and centralized because it feels strong, feels like if you need something big and strong, you want to build something big and strong. The idea that a bunch of coordinated weak nodes could add up to something strong is kind of counterintuitive to us, and it's difficult for us to wrap our minds around it. But she went and showed it to Google. Like, distributed computing can do cumulatively so much more than you could have ever gotten out of these big centralized servers. It's just the power of distribution, the power of distributed, coordinated action. She lived through that at Google, in the internet, in computing, and now basically that same conceptual revolution is coming to the energy grid. And it's so fascinating that she's like parachuted over and is now doing the same thing in energy. It's awesome. But that's, to me, is like why it's so conceptually interesting, is we're seeing this physical infrastructure around us finally become modern and digital the way everything else around us is. This weird analog legacy system that is underneath all this fancy digital stuff we have is like this weirdly primitive, it's this weirdly primitive that's still run by like guys throwing physical switches and calling one another on telephones. It's just like weirdly low tech. And we're finally seeing all the sort of high-tech thinking, distributed coordination, information, et cetera. All of that is coming to the grid, and it's just like so fascinating to watch. Who would not be fascinated by this?
So just for our listeners, as Dave's talking about, Astrid founded Camus, which is working on grid orchestration and helping utilities have the knobs to turn and also try and turn those knobs so they can know, okay, can we let these data centers or other players actually get on the grid and interconnect, and doing really interesting work. And one of the things that she said to me, just going back to her time at Google, she was like, I was at Google, I built all this stuff, and then I went and talked to my friend who was, I don't know, some famous VC, who's her mentor, one of her mentors, and he was like, what do you like to do? And she's like, I like to work on really big systems. And her friend said, well, I'm sorry, you're going to have to stay at Google because that's the biggest system. Like, the only other system is the grid, right? She's like, oh, go look at that. Let me go take a look at that.
Yeah.
Grid.
It's weird because it's been run by utilities that are overseen by these PUCs. It's all very technical. It's all very obscure. It all just kind of takes place outside of public view. So it's weird that a system that is so core to our lives and prosperity and our day-to-day lives and everything we do is so kind of like has been neglected and out of the public mind for so long. But now all of a sudden, basically, everybody's interested in it. And one of the things that I think we've seen, if you stay in this game long enough, one of the things you see is when something has been neglected and people have not been working at it, your estimate of what's possible tends to be very low, right? Tends to be very low of the mark, because when people get in and start doing stuff, they find other opportunities, they find other things. Like, once you start doing it, you're like, oh, I can make much more of this than I thought. And that is absolutely true of this distributed, coordinated energy system concept. It's barely a reality yet. We've barely started doing it yet. I think once we get in there and we really are digitally controlling all our energy at every level, I think we're going to find that there are things that are possible that we can't even conceive of right now. You know what I mean? It's like so much more runway than we think, because our view is obscured by the fact that we haven't gotten in there. We haven't really gotten in there. You see this story over and over again, like geothermal these days. Like, geothermal's kicking up again, and they're starting to realize, like, oh, when you really look with modern tools, there's geothermal resources all over the place. We just didn't know because we didn't look. And it's the same with efficiency or thermal storage. Another story I love, box of rocks, storing heat rather than storing electricity. That's just not something we needed to do, really, in the fossil fuel era up till now. But now, all of a sudden, we have a big need for it. And so, like, really big, substantial developments in thermal storage are taking place, like, every few months. And if you're like an engineer or a nerd and you want to get in physical systems and make a difference and do something that matters, there's just like tons of room here. There's tons of discoveries waiting to happen. You know what I mean? I wish that we could get to the Harvards of the world and tell them, like, quit going and trying to shave another 0.01 seconds off of a fucking financial transaction or whatever it is you're doing when you all get hoovered into the financial world of hedge funds and instead like, look at this cool stuff over here. You can discover things that haven't been discovered. You can make real advances. You can help save the world. You can be a hero. Like, this is where the finest minds of the country ought to be going. I wish we could get the U.S. elite to wake up to that. You know what I mean? Like, we don't need to fiddle around with getting you your burrito 3 seconds faster. We don't need all the tech guys working on that. And, like, so much more attention to AI than to energy. But, like, you don't get the AI without the energy. This is a crucial thing that I think a lot of people have missed is you got to build that electric foundation, that infrastructure for the AI to sit on top of, or you don't get the AI. But also, I think genuine energy abundance, trivially cheap, surplus energy of a sort that we've never encountered as a species is right over the horizon. And I think that's going to be at least as revolutionary to human affairs as AI is going to be. But like, all the hype is going to the AI, and this is just as or more important than AI, but it's not getting the same hype. It's not getting the same resources. It's not getting the same billions. And I don't know what the explanation for that is. I guess AI is just sexy, but I think doing what we need to the electricity system to get it to support AI is going to end up having much more far-reaching effects than AI itself. That's a very hot take, a very controversial take. Not widely agreed, but I'm sticking with it.
We could probably identify some pretty obvious reasons why AI is running the hype cycle at the moment. I mean, you could talk about the stock market, you talk about how people think about it, but for better or worse, the fears, concerns in their personal lives, and climate, even as much as people are concerned, that's right. It's not today's problem as much as it's the ongoing. But from the lens that I see, and I know you share this lens, you know, JP Morgan just comes out with a study that says over the next 5 years, $5 trillion is going to be invested in AI infrastructure. Massive, massive number. And then you step back and you say, okay, well, the IEA said $2 trillion went into global clean energy investment. Last year, 2.2 will have gone in globally into clean energy. This year, you just project that out, which is basically like the muddle through scenario. 5 more years, that's $10 trillion into clean energy globally. That's twice as much as AI. So that's actually what's driving the global economy more than AI in terms of investment spend. But nonetheless, that's not our frame for how we think about the world, certainly in our society.
I want us to start thinking of the grid and electricity capacity and distributed electricity capacity as AI infrastructure, right? You don't get the AI without it. That is AI infrastructure. So just a little bit of that money, just a little bit, a little bit of that 5 trillion, just like a half a trillion, say, peel off a half a trillion. I could revolutionize the electricity grid with that money.
I mean, I could see it too. We had some executives from Amazon on the show. We did a show about Amazon's logistics and their delivery and the way that they now stack their logistics and their warehouses. The premise was the faster Amazon delivers, the lower emissions per item to your house or delivery it actually goes down. It was fascinating. It was a cool setup to do a show.
Speaking of systems thinking, like that's a fun systems job, right? How to make all those pieces work together.
These guys are fascinating. I find when you talk to these guys, you know, it's similar to when I worked with SpaceX guys when we started our company, Planted for building materials. But when I talk to the same thing, we talk to the guys at Amazon. It's like, how do you do that? Or let me ask you this: you're the largest private developer of renewable energy in the world. You're not a renewable energy company. Like, how do you go do that? And you just hear them talk. They're like, you know, it's project management. It's like the Amazon algorithm for how we go do things. Or like I hear Elon Musk talk, you know, it's like, here's my human algorithm for how I want to clone everybody in my companies. And then you go do it, or you don't stay here. But what struck me with Amazon, and we've looked into that and their climate pledge, and we had a company called Interface. I don't know if you know that they do carbon negative tiles. And stuff. It's a really cool company. Been around forever. They're signed on to this pledge. And it struck us, as we were talking to the folks at Amazon, like Amazon saying we're going to be net zero by 2040, and actually the work that they do feels to me like that's moving the corporate world. Because if you're a $2 trillion company, and yes, you're selling a lot of stuff, but you're also buying from like everyone in the Fortune 500 or most of them, right?
This is also true. This is also true of Apple. Like all the attention goes to like your Googles and Metas, which are mostly digital, mostly virtual companies. Apple and Amazon are physical companies. They're moving physical stuff around. And so when they make changes, it really redounds through the physical world. Like Mac and Amazon greening, I think, is way more significant than the pure digital guys, because they have to deal with like trucks, factories, things like that.
Yeah. So I could see, just as you're describing, okay, how do we think about our AI infrastructure play here where Amazon, well, we're investing to all these companies to do like mass timber AI factories. Is it such a far leap to be thinking like, hey, why don't we think about distributed energy and how we actually get power to our... I could see it happening. It doesn't feel terribly far-fetched to me to imagine that scenario.
The problem is like you can't do it without engaging on some level public entities like utilities, PUCs, legislatures in some places. You know what I mean? It's not just something a private company can go do on its own, which I think is one of the reasons a lot of them don't pay it as much attention, because it just sounds like a tar pit. It's just very complicated. So this is one of those things where there needs to be a few brave kind of first movers to just sort of iron out what it looks like, what the business model is, ease the way for the next. I'd love for Amazon to get involved in that. I'd love for them to put their creativity toward that.
Okay, so that's really fascinating to think through distributed energy, how this story may unfold, hopefully unfolds 2026, 2027. Just to stay on our theme here for the last few minutes that we're together, either from what's transpired in 2025 and how that may extend in 2026, or as you're looking at the year ahead, do you have thoughts on what some of those other big stories might be?
Well,
it could be tech, policy, markets, whatever you're seeing.
When you asked me the initial question, I had two different answers, because there's kind of two big stories. One is the stuff we're talking about, and the other one is the political story, which obviously, the election of Donald Trump for the second time was a notable story, a memorable story. Let's just say that jumps out of the 2025 milieu. So it's weird that all this stuff is happening and moving forward and developing in all these cool ways. And then you have this federal administration, which is like explicitly going backward, explicitly fighting it all. How does that play out? How does that settle out? I have no idea. So next year, do Dems take the House? That's very interesting. Do Dems try to impeach any of these cabinet officials who are doing crazy things? There are ways politics could intersect with this story, accelerate it or slow it down. It's remarkable how much of this stuff is going on despite, basically, like the feds explicitly turning against it. I mean, there's a logic to it. There's a global movement toward it that is, in some sense, doesn't matter what the U.S. does. It's happening regardless. Like, as many people are pointing out, everyone else is just turning toward China for leadership now, but they're doing it. Like, if you're an emerging economy and you're an oil importer or a gas importer, and now you have the tools necessary to become energy self-sufficient, why wouldn't you? So the politics and geopolitics, I think, are super interesting to watch in the coming year, in the midterms. That will be a huge signal of what to expect in 2028. I feel like when Trump was first elected, there was a kind of sense in excess of the numbers. If you recall, he barely won. Like, it was a small, he barely squeaked by. It was a small margin of victory, but for some reason, everybody interpreted it as, oh, the world's changed, permanently changed. Like, woke is out, rule of law is gone. We don't talk about climate change anymore. Now we just talk about energy affordability. Everything's different. But, is it? How much of that is a temporary bubble phenomenon tied to the personage of Donald Trump himself that will go away when he goes away? I don't think anybody knows the answer to that question. I don't think anybody has a confident answer to that question. But once we're past the midterms and we're into squarely lame duck presidency territory, then I think we're going to start getting more signs and signals about, is there a successor? Is he going to try to be his own successor, right? Is he going to try for a third term? If not, who's going to step forward? Or is the whole thing going to fall apart? Is public opinion going to continue swinging away from him and in a positive direction on immigration and on climate and on energy? I mean, this is what bugged me so much about the Democratic consultants who, woke's out, let's scurry the other way. I'm like, if you understand thermostatic public opinion, like you constantly say you do, you should be able to anticipate that Trump's enormous, grotesque lurch in the direction of violent authoritarianism is going to prompt a thermostatic swing back of public opinion the other way. What if we just, instead of chasing it that way and then chasing it back this way, we just stayed here and waited for people to come back? Then we might look like we knew what we believed and we had the courage of our convictions and we like had actual beliefs rather than polls. But instead, everybody just chased it that way, and now public opinion's swinging back in our direction. You're going to start seeing people chase it the other way. So U.S. politics is so crazy volatile and unpredictable right now. So, like, what am I looking forward to 2026? Probably a series of horrors that I'm probably going to wake up every morning, scroll my phone, and feel that urge to move to the country and cut off the internet, but also like big things are going to happen. I don't know. Politics basically is what I'm watching. We're going to see signs like how enduring is this current state of affairs? How enduring is MAGA? How enduring is the national being sick of everything, sick of everyone, sick of every institution, unsettled, unhappy with everything? And another possibility, which I think is very real, which is, longer than next year, but in the next few years, is just, it seems possible to me that the media environment now, especially with social media, is such that no one can be happy about anything. Everybody's unhappy about everything. And when Trump came in, everybody's going to be unhappy with him. They're going to boot him out. Democrats going to come in. Everybody's going to be unhappy. They're going to boot him out. Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Do you know what I mean? Like, the media environment is so diseased and broken now that it's sort of foreclosed the possibility of productive consensus politics. Do you know what I mean? It might be that we're misdiagnosing the situation, that no politician can overcome this environment, that everybody's doomed in this environment to just, everybody feels malaise no matter what happens, because malaise is the signature mood of social media. That is what spreads on social media, what gets clicks. So I've got my eye on that too. Is anything like an Obama style resurgence of positivity or optimism or pro-social, is that even possible anymore? What happened in 2008, is that even a conceivable thing anymore? I don't know. I don't see it for many of the frickin' geezers in charge of the Democratic Party, but there's lots of young people out there doing stuff that I don't know anything about. So I hope they're doing cool stuff, because I don't see a lot of hope in the extant system, but it's so volatile and vulnerable right now. So just how does that intersect with the energy world is an interesting question.
You could take that in so many different ways. When I think back to the emergence of Obama, I was in my, early 20s when Clinton won. And I remember... Similar
wave of optimism. Yeah, similar...
a feeling of hope. It wasn't as explicit. It wasn't as... his campaign slogan wasn't basically hope, yes, we can, right? It wasn't but there was that feeling, and I think amongst youth. And then I remember when Obama was elected and feeling I've been through the Clinton years, so... let's see. I mean, I like it, but I'm less sure of how this is all going to actually work out, which is fine. But you don't get Obama if you don't have the Iraq War and Bush and all that. So who knows what's going to come? I agree. It's so hard to predict. You're saying the media landscape is completely busted, and maybe that dynamic no longer even applies, right?
We seem to be in a cycle in the 21st century where we elect Republicans and they screw everything up. And then we elect a Democrat to come in and repair things. And when things get up and running just enough that people can start taking them for granted again, we elect another Republican to come in and destroy them again. And that's I've lived through personally 3 of those cycles now, and I would really rather not the rest of my life be seeing that happen over and over again. So I don't know how we break out of it, but I feel one thing that people like you and I should keep in mind, i.e. old people, is how fundamentally different it was for us to come of age, to come of maturity in what I still think of as basically normal politics, which is people in suits talking in a reasonably dignified way, in a way that you wouldn't kick them out of your elementary school potluck. Just normal politics. Young people these days, and by that I mean people below 30, have no frame of reference for normal politics. Politics in the U.S. for them has always been a spectacle occupied by carnival barkers and clowns and weirdos and horrible people and weird people. So, like, what would hope look like for them? What are they hoping for? What do they want? What do they even aspire to? They've never seen a politics that looks normal or productive, I guess. So I have no idea where their heads are or how they think, how young people are thinking or what they want. So I choose to find some hope in that uncertainty. I hope that something new can come out of that. They're not tied to the old world. You know, for me, I just would like not to have open gutter racism from the most powerful people in the country. Like my bar is low at this point, but presumably young people want more. What'll they build with nothing in their back pocket to define what normal politics is? What do they build if they're allowed to build something? I really don't know. That's a fascinating question to me.
That is a fascinating question. So as I think about this conversation that we're having, and I think about where we started, the enthusiasm, at least the excitement around the story and the possibility and what can happen around the grid, and we started with data centers and how that could inadvertently become a catalyst for something that folks like you and people who have tracked the clean energy and have seen and wanted for a very, very long time. That is really interesting to me. Then we talk about the political morass and what that looks like today. You can talk about for 10 days. Right? And then the first time when I got a chance to talk to you early in the summer, you had also brought up solar and learning curves and something you alluded to today, but potentially the arrival at trivially cheap, abundant, clean energy. And today you talked about how that may be defining the future just as much as AI. And so the question that's on my mind is, despite the politics of today, does 2025 moving into 2026, does this moment feel different to you? You've tracked this for so long. Do you feel like there is a different momentum, or is this just the moment we find ourselves in, and 8 years ago would have been really interesting about something else? Like, are we evolving? Are we advancing?
I would say, when I started back in 2004 in green journalism, it was just climate change, and there wasn't a lot of talk about solutions because there weren't a lot of solutions. Like, what do you tell people? They're like, okay, it's a problem. What do I do? And I'd be like, go march, I guess. But now, like, starting in the 2010s, especially now, all these technologies have developed, fallen in price, and now you have multiple driving forces pushing clean electrification that are sufficient in themselves to justify clean electrification that have nothing to do with climate change. You can make a full and complete argument in favor of clean electrification without ever mentioning climate change. It is justified on the economics. It's justified on the immediate air pollution and water pollution benefits. It's justified by the connection to AI and AI dominance. It's justified by rising energy prices and the age and decrepitude of our current grid, right? So you got to do this stuff for a bunch of different reasons. There's just a bunch of different reasons, all pointing in the same direction. You got to do this stuff. So much of the politics of climate change you can just slough off. Like, I want for there to be people out there fixated on climate change and talking about it and fighting it, but it doesn't have to be everybody's lead. It doesn't have to be on everybody's t-shirt. You know what I mean? Like, I can walk into a group of executives and tell them exactly why they need to do this for their own bottom line reasons and their own long-term interests, and I don't ever have to invoke climate change, which I think sort of suggests that a lot of these things are on some time horizon inevitable. We are moving in this direction, and it's just about who gets there first. And I also think that, like, in terms of a unifying story, people have tried to make climate that story for a long time, and I just personally don't think that's ever going to work. It's not that we haven't yet stumbled on the exact right phrase or the exact right framing, or you know what I mean? We've been stumbling through these messaging battles for decades. It's the nature of the problem. It's a negative thing. It's an unpleasant thing. Even when you say climate change campaigner, well, I'm not campaigning for climate change, am I? Like, anti-climate change, like make your whole identity and actions about against something. You know what I mean? Like, it's just not particularly inspiring, I think, to a lot of people. But the story of we have now, finally, at last, for the first time in history, the tools available to have a cheaper, cleaner, better functioning, funner world that's quieter and more pleasant and has cooler gadgets in it. And between us and that world are a bunch of bloated incumbents, bloated, aging incumbents who want to keep us away from that cooler, better world so that they can squeeze every bit of profits from their old, dying business model. That has the benefit of being A, true, and B, yes, I want good things and I want to fight bad things. That makes sense to people. We've got the stuff. They don't want us using it because they want us tied to their crappy, old, dying business model. That is a story that can actually galvanize people and get people positively aiming for something that they want, trying to get something that they want rather than trying to avoid something that they don't want. I just think that's a better story. It's true. It's going to bring in demographics that the climate change story would never be able to bring in. And I think that story and the old story about climate change being real dangerous and going to cause lots of big problems also still true. I think those two stories are like, there's nothing wrong with having them both. Right? There's nothing wrong with them both being around. There's nothing wrong with some people emphasizing one and some people emphasizing the other. I just think at present, everybody's kind of stuck and tied to the one, and we need more people in energy, especially when we're talking to young people. That second story, that hopeful story, something to build, something to want. Otherwise, like, what is America? If you're young and you're looking around you at all this, what is America for? What do you want? What are we trying to do? What are we for? What do we aspire to? Like, there's none of the idealism that sort of lingered for so long in the post-war America. It's all gone. Now we need something new. And I think this is a great story, like energy self-sufficiency. We're going to break our ties. I mean, we've spent now 2 centuries with basically global events and global politics being dictated by people who just happen to have the luck to find themselves sitting on top of fossil fuels. And they turn out, if you find yourself sitting on top of fossil fuels, suddenly you have massive power and you tend to act like a selfish asshole. Like, what if we didn't have to care about those people anymore, right? What if we all had our own energy and you could just do your own thing, empower yourself? You know, the implications of this, once it's like further down the road, like once this transition to clean electrification is further down the road, the implications are enormous. And I think just that's going to stimulate the imaginations of young people. Like, what can I build out of this? What can I make when I'm energy independent? And as I said to you last time, and I keep saying to people and over again, it's not just that modern humanity has never been in a state of energy surplus, energy plenty. As far as we know, no form of life in the universe has ever solved the energy problem, basically, where they're no longer constrained or shaped by scarcity. What will that look like for the first form of life in the history of the universe to have all the energy it needs? You know, like, depending on how sort of like airy-fairy and out in the future you want to get, it's like very interesting. And the road from here to there is, you can see it. And that to me is interesting and exciting in a way that endless climate dread is just never going to be.
Wow. Thank you. That was so wonderful. I really appreciate you sharing and coming on and doing this with me.
That's my pleasure. I got all these rants
awesome.
built up. I gotta let
them
out.
out, man. I am so glad Supercool is at least one venue and outlet for you to do that. I really appreciate it. I just love how deeply you think and how clearly you explain things. So, yeah, thank you.
Thanks. I'm glad you're in the fight as well. We're all pulling in the same direction.
I will see you in 2026.
Then we can figure out what happened after all?
We'll come back.
That'll be fun. All right, I'll see you next year.
And thank you for listening. If you're enjoying Supercool and appreciate our conversations that merge climate, innovation, and commerce, please take a moment to subscribe and leave us a review. It's the best way you can help the show reach other future-forward decision makers who would benefit from these conversations too. See you next time.